Welcome to the Business Leader Briefing, a conversation with Chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Lina. We will be beginning shortly. Thank you. And let's go ahead and begin. I now have the pleasure to introduce President of Public-Private Strategies Institute, Mr. Rhett Buttle.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so thrilled to be able to have you for another one of our business leader briefings. Today, we are so excited to be having a conversation with the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. Before we hop in, we want to thank so many of you who've joined us from across the country. I know we have hundreds of business owners and business leaders streaming in, but most importantly, I just wanted to take a quick moment and thank some of our amazing national partners. You will see across the screen, we have representation from business organizations across the country, including our friends at the Black Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber, the National Asian Chamber, the Next Gen Chamber of Commerce, Women Impacting Public Policy, many of the National Minority Supplier Development Council and their affiliates, the National Association for the Self-Employed, the Small Business Development Community, and Small Business for America's Future. And I know there's others out there, Center Forward and the Atlanta Black Chamber. So thank you all so much, because without you all partnering with us on these critical events, we wouldn't be able to provide these critical opportunities for business owners to engage with policymakers all across the spectrum. We've been able to have folks all the way from the national level to the local level to really make sure that small business owners are getting current information and have the ability from folks who are shaping our policy and our economy. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into today's conversation. I think what we wanted to do was have a moment to hear from our special guests. And then what we'll do is we'll take some questions from the audience. We'll invite folks to put questions into the Q&A, as well as we've asked for questions before we started, and we'll use those to make sure that we're hearing from this community. So it's now my pleasure to turn the conversation over to Lina Khan. Lina is the current chair of the Federal Trade Commission. She was nominated by President Joe Biden on March 22, 2021, and she was confirmed by the Senate and sworn in on June 15th, 2021. Prior to her current appointment at the FTC, Khan was an associate professor at Columbia Law School, and I believe she is the youngest chair of the Federal Trade Commission, being confirmed at a very impressive age that I won't share here, but maybe something for folks to go and check out. So with that, we are so excited to be able to welcome you to this Business Leader Briefing, and Chair Khan, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rhett. And thanks so much to the Public-Private Strategies Institute for hosting today's briefing. It's so great to be here with you all. I know when you all are steeped in the day-to-day operations of running a business, it isn't always easy to kind of step away and tune in for these types of things. So very grateful to be here with you all. So I thought I would start by just sharing a little bit about what the Federal Trade Commission is, what our job is, and how what we do affects competition and businesses. So the FTC was created by Congress back in 1914 against the backdrop of the robber barons and a deep concern about the industrial trusts and how monopolists had captured control over key arteries of commerce in ways that were stifling competition and really impeding the ability of farmers and of merchants and others to really get to market and compete on a level playing field. And so that's really our DNA. Today, the FTC enforces two sets of laws primarily. The antitrust laws, which are really about promoting competition, about fair competition, making sure that businesses are able to compete on the merits, and that, if somebody has a good idea and they're able to get financing for that idea, they're able to go to the market, and whether they succeed or fail is really linked to the success of their idea and not linked to whether they are upsetting one of the existing giants or one of the existing big guys. So that's really the core of competition, wanting to make sure that companies can compete on the merits of their ideas and products and services, and not having a marketplace that is instead dominated by monopolies who are using their monopoly power to squash out rivals and undermine competition. So that's one core part of our work. Another core part is that we enforce the consumer protection laws. And so the consumer protection laws prohibit deception and they prohibit unfair practices. And so a lot of times this involves going after fraud, going after privacy and security abuses. And although the end people who we're protecting is consumers, this also affects businesses, because instances in which firms are able to get away with deceptive or fraudulent practices oftentimes ends up hurting honest businesses and hurting law-abiding businesses. So there's also a competition dimension to our consumer protection work. So this is really a core part of what we do. One of my priorities at the FTC has been to make sure that we are hearing from regular people, hearing from small businesses, entrepreneurs, consumers, and workers, to make sure that we are getting a better grasp of what's really happening in the marketplace and that our work is fully informed by that. We do these regular open commission meetings where people sign up and they come talk to us about what types of issues they're seeing in the marketplace. One common theme that we hear about is how a whole set of markets now increasingly seem to be dominated by middlemen. And so in order to get access to market, small businesses, or be it gig workers or entrepreneurs, talk about how they end up being entirely dependent on one or two players in ways that can really undermine competition and allow the middleman to basically structure access to the market in ways that are anti-competitive. So, be it chicken farmers, be it community pharmacists, be it independent grocers, these are all entities that we end up hearing from about how a lack of competition in their markets is really undermining open and fair competition. We've also been focusing recently on smaller business and including franchises. We just put out a request for information that is asking franchisees and franchisors and others in that line of business to share with us any business practices that are of concern. Again, in part because we've been hearing a lot from franchisees in particular about how the certain business practices that franchisors were engaging in might not really be setting up franchisees to be able to compete fairly and to be fully informed about what they're getting themselves into. So this is just a small snapshot of some of our current work, but again, really excited to be here and happy to get any questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that overview. And I think what we want to do is we want to invite the audience in so folks have the ability to do question and answer. And we did take some questions before so that we could get the conversation going. I think, Chair Khan, when we announced this event, folks were like, this is interesting. We normally hear from the SBA or the Department of Commerce. And so I'm not sure folks often, small business people think, oh, the FTC is out there sort of working on our behalf. And so would love to have you just sort of break down a little bit for us, in what ways the FTC, you've talked a little bit about this in your opening remarks, how you're working to support small businesses and to ensure their economic success, and why, I've often found in policymaking, and I'll just say for me, consumers and small businesses often sort of have a similar set of issues that are sometimes different than other sorts of businesses. And so, how does the FTC think about that? And why are you thinking about small business sort of as a constituency that you serve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I said, one of my key goals has been to make sure that we are enforcing both the competition, but also the consumer protection laws to protect consumers, but also to protect honest businesses and law-abiding businesses. And so in our consumer protection work, for example, we're right now looking very closely at business credit reporting companies. So there are a whole set of laws that govern consumer-facing credit reporting companies and a whole set of rules and regulations that make sure those companies are acting appropriately with regards to consumer credit reports. But there's this hidden part of the business that's firm facing that we found, is sort of like the wild, wild west. And so in some of our enforcement work, we saw that small businesses were getting saddled with credit reports that were based on inaccurate information, that it was very difficult to get that information fixed. It was very opaque, and that, these credit reports were significantly affecting the livelihood of small businesses, because if there's an error on there, it affects your ability to get capital and really impacts you very significantly. So we brought an enforcement action against a company called Dun & Bradstreet that had been engaging in some of these problematic practices. We're also right now looking very closely at how some of our other authorities like the telemarketing sales rule or business opportunity rule can also be used to protect consumers. So we have rules against deception that basically require if a business is offering business opportunities to people, they need to make sure that they're accurately disclosing, how much it's going to cost, what type of investment it's going to require on the front end, and that they're being accurate about any claims that they're making around how much money somebody can make through a certain business venture. So that's some of the other work that we're doing, again, on the business-facing side. Lastly, I'll mention we've been very active focusing on right to repair issues, so making sure that consumers have a right to repair their own products. That also affects independent repair shops, because what we'd heard is that when dominant firms are restricting how people can do their own independent repair, that also diverts business and undermines independent repair shops. So that's just another vein of what we're doing there.
It sounds like focused on sort of leveling the playing field, giving small businesses the chance to compete. We know also that small business and in particular entrepreneurship can be really key to building generational wealth. We often hear, particularly in the work that we do in communities of color, how important it is. There's also been a lot of conversation about non-compete clauses, and research has been showing that non-compete clauses have the ability to stop folks from either starting their own businesses. Sometimes it can hamper innovation, further entrepreneurship, and just affects sort of healthy competition. And so we'd love to hear, how you are thinking about non-compete clauses for the small employers on the phone.
It's a great question. So we took a very close look at how non-competes are being used. And over the last decade in particular, different states have gone in slightly different directions. So states like California and Oklahoma and North Dakota have pretty significant restrictions on how non-competes can be enforced. Other states have added new types of policies. And so what that did was give us a bit of a natural experiment to see what the effects of non-competes really are. And what we saw is that quite predictably, non-competes can affect workers and really limit their ability to freely seek out better opportunities in ways that can lead to stagnant wages. But we also saw that there's an effect on competition, because when firms, especially big firms, are locking up talent pools through this use of non-competes, it often means that independent businesses or entrepreneurs or startups don't have access to a critical talent pool. And this actually came to our radar in part through some of our enforcement work, where we heard from a company that had been able to secure investment and capital and build factories in what was a relatively concentrated market dominated by just a small number of firms. And so they thought they had an opening to enter and be able to inject some much needed price competition. But what they saw was that when they went around trying to hire the relevant talent pool, that talent pool was almost entirely locked up by the incumbent giants who had used non-competes to make sure that their workers couldn't move. And so there's really a direct effect on competition on businesses who unfairly may not have access to the workers and the employees they need in order to really be able to grow and scale. So we proposed this rule back in January. We got 26,000 comments, including from the business community. So we're looking closely at that to figure out where to land.
It's super helpful. In the work I've done with small employers throughout the year around public policy, they'll often say, like, small employers in particular will say, like, I just want a chance to compete. I just want a fair set of rules. And so I'm wondering how you think about fair competition as you're sort of, thinking about these decisions.
Yeah, so the core for us is really, are companies competing on the merits, right? And so in instances where you have companies who are looking to get ahead by making, deceptive or fraudulent claims to consumers, right? That's not fair competition. In instances in which companies are inhibiting rivals through anti-competitive means, that's not fair competition. One of the lawsuits that we brought last year was in the context of pesticides, where you have these two big pesticide manufacturers that farmers very much depend on. And you had all of these smaller generic firms that were looking to get into the market and be able to lower the price that farmers have to pay for pesticide. But what the big manufacturers did was basically enter into this pay to block scheme, where they were basically locking out the generics from the market in ways that hurt the generic companies, but also ultimately hurt farmers who, ended up paying collectively billions of dollars more for these pesticides. And then ultimately all of us consumers ended up paying for it, right? Because some of those costs get passed down to us in the cost of food. So that's just one example of how, ensuring and promoting robust and fair competition can really accrue to the benefit of really everybody other than the monopolists.
Makes sense. I wanted to pivot in a little bit and talk a little bit about what we've seen as growth for small businesses during the pandemic. So as you can imagine, during the pandemic, many small businesses had to close their open-facing storefronts and really started to experiment in new ways with the digital economy. And of course, there was a large part of that already happening, but we saw huge acceleration, during COVID-19 when folks were inside, and a lot of traditional main streets really turning to digital tools. And we really hear a lot of businesses, empowered by digital tools, but then we also hear some businesses who are really struggling with digital tools and the way that that's sort of limiting their practice. And so, I know the FTC has been really committed to ensuring consumer protections as it relates to digital market. And I'm just, I'm curious how we think about for the small businesses who do rely upon digital tools and those are struggling, how does the FTC sort of approach this balance of sort of protecting consumers and small employers at the same time allowing many small businesses who are being accelerated by the digital economy? And so how do we balance those two things that I think are, sometimes feel at odds with each other, but finding the right balance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. And I should say one of the top sources of complaints that we get from smaller businesses in the space of digital markets is that a lot of the key tools that you need to really be able to compete or really access digital markets are controlled by a relatively small number of companies, right? And so there can be concerns about whether they're being overcharged for access to those tools or whether some of the giants that control those tools are kind of using their power in anti-competitive ways. Some of the other issues that we're looking at consumer facing relate to things like fake reviews and instances in which consumers are seeing reviews that really don't reflect people who've actually bought the service, or maybe they're being paid to either exaggerate how good something is or really go out and give a negative review to a rival. So that's the type of work that we think benefits consumers, but also can benefit honest businesses, right? Because if you're an honest business and you're getting reviews that are based on consumers' actual experience, you don't want to be forced to compete with a business that instead is going out and paying companies to either give them positive reviews or come and give your company negative reviews, right? We've actually seen this in some of our work that businesses will pay consumers to go give negative reviews to their rivals. So I think you're right that there are some maybe areas of conflict in this space, but also I think some areas of compatibility.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's all about finding sort of the balance and the right approach. I think similar one question that we heard a lot, sort of come up for a lot of small businesses, they want to stay small. And for some of them, they run their businesses for 10 to 15 years and sort of their part of the American dream is maybe selling it. And it looks different for every businesses. Some folks pass it on to their employees through an ownership model, which is really exciting. Some folks, keep it in the family. I think for some people who start small businesses, they often see M&A, mergers and acquisitions, as part of that. And so, I know M&A has been something the FTC has been thinking a lot about, and it plays an important role in sort of evaluating mergers and acquisitions. But we also know that many startups exit through M&A. And so again, to this balance question, how do you think about that balance for, someone who may want to sort of, exit through M&A and sort of, shaping it right so that possibility is there, but also making sure that we're protecting consumers and Main Street employers?
So the law that we enforce here, that Congress told us to enforce, is basically a law that prohibits mergers that substantially lessen competition or tend to create a monopoly. And so really the core inquiry is this merger going to be hurting competition? We get thousands of proposed mergers a year. A very small fraction of those really even get a second look from us, and an even smaller fraction of those end up getting a lawsuit. I think unfortunately for some years, there was a perception that, a merger between the third biggest and the second biggest, or the fourth biggest and the third biggest company in a market could be proposed, and that would be okay, even in instances where that was hurting competition and leaving consumers with fewer options and workers with fewer options and really making it difficult for independent businesses. What we're looking to do is really rebalance that so that companies are on much clearer notice about what types of mergers are likely to raise legal concerns and which ones aren't. Right now, we are finalizing our revision of the merger guidelines, which is an enforcement manual that we put out along with the Justice Department. And we're hoping that this manual can really provide much more clarity, including to the business community, about what types of deals are likely to raise legal concerns and which ones aren't. A key priority for us in this process has been to make sure that we're hearing from the business community, including small businesses, independent businesses, startups, but also ultimately that these guidelines are written in a way that are accessible. I think sometimes government documents can be written in a way that's only accessible to, lawyers and lobbyists and economists. And, we want to make sure that this is actually a manual that business folks can pick up and look at and understand as well. So we'll, in short order, be making that public, and hopefully that can help as well.
Yeah, no, and I want to return to that and give you an opportunity sort of in the close to talk about how businesses can get engaged, particularly because sometimes it feels like for a small employer, there are not ways to do so. And I think, we're really committed to that success. But sort of as we're wrapping up, I kind of wanted to look a little globally and just hear how you're thinking about global markets. I think a lot when folks think about small business, they think about here at home. And we know that small businesses create 2 out of every 3 new jobs in America, but also increasingly we're seeing small businesses bring their goods and services, across the world. And so how does the FTC think about sort of the global economy and the role you play? And for the small employers on the phone, how should they be thinking about that?
So the FTC has long had what we call our Office of International Affairs, where we work very closely with enforcers and regulators in other jurisdictions to make sure that we're understanding, how they're going to be applying their laws, and ensure that where possible, we're not reaching wildly inconsistent outcomes. We very much understand that, small businesses are now competing in a global economy, both as sellers, but in some instances also as purchasers of goods and services that are sold by multinational companies. I know the pandemic ended up putting a lot of these dynamics in stark relief, where you had, issues with supply chains and a lack of resiliency in our supply chains that really meant that a lot of US-based companies, including small businesses, were having trouble getting access to essential goods, essential inputs. And so one thing that we've been looking at very closely is this issue of supply chains, and how do we make sure that we have enough competition and resiliency and redundancy in some of our supply chains, so that small businesses in the US are not just, one earthquake away or one natural disaster away somewhere else in the world from being able to do their work and their business. And so thinking about that resiliency component is big for us.
That's super helpful. We're going to wrap up quickly here, but I did want to give you the opportunity to share, I think we share a common mission to make sure that small businesses' voices are heard in this process. And so, how would you recommend, small businesses either engage with the FTC or think about their engagement with you and your team? Of course, we can do more of these if you're interested, and find other ways to sort of bring other actors into it. But I just wanted to give you, I know we're committed to making sure that, government is accessible for Main Street and for small businesses. So would love to hear that piece from you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have open commission meetings every other month. If you go to our website, they will kind of list out when the next one is. And as I said, anybody can kind of sign up and come speak to us. For folks that have complaints, we have a complaint hotline. Let me put it in the chat where people can report fraud, consumer-facing fraud, but also business-facing fraud. And I'm putting it in the chat, but I don't know if folks can see this one. So those are just 2 ways. We also pretty regularly will do things like open up dockets where we collect public input. So as I mentioned, for the non-compete rule, we ended up getting a lot of comments. We are maybe doing some additional work on this issue of fake reviews, in which case we'll be very keen to get more comments. So Brett, maybe we can figure out the best way for us to be kind of circulating some of those opportunities as and when they come up, because we would definitely be very eager to hear from you all. And I see some of the really great additional questions that folks have, and it's clear that, this is a very engaged group, and we at the FTC really want to be hearing from you.
Yeah, and we're super sensitive to people's times because, as you noted at the beginning, business owners don't have a ton of time. So we're going to go ahead and pause it here. But I think what we'll do is, if it's okay, Chair Cohn, we'll wrap up all the comments we got. We'll share them with your team so that you guys get the feedback there as well, if that's allowed. And we just really want to thank everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time. I know you have a ton of stuff going on. So to meet with a large group of small business owners means a lot to us. And I think we want to thank, again, all of our partners who made today possible. Without them, we wouldn't have had the hundreds of business owners and business leaders from across the country join us. And so with that, huge thanks to you and thanks to everyone who joined us. And we will now go ahead and conclude this event. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much. Look forward to being in touch.